Hi, I'm Selena, and I am quickly losing lighting. Today, I'm going to be reviewing two books that I finished this week. If you want to listen to one but not the other, you can sort of skip around. There's timestamps, but it's only two books, so hopefully it won't be as long as last week's, but I can't promise that. And as always, I'm not going to be spoiling anything, but I am going to be giving a bit more detail because this is a review, and I want to give you an idea whether it's for you or not. I want to tell my thoughts on specific parts of the book, but again, no spoilers, but if I might say a little bit more than you want to hear if you're someone who doesn't like to know anything about your books. So if that's you, then maybe this video isn't for you. You can come back after you've read it if you want to hear some sort of my vague thoughts on it. And I'll see you for the next video. For those who stayed and want to hear my thoughts, let's get started. This review, I am going to be reviewing Sword of Kaigen by M.L. Wong and The Rise of Kyoshi by F.C. Yi. And we're going to start with The Sword of Kaigen. I loved this book, just so we all know this is about to be a gushing review. So Sword of Kaigen is an adult high fantasy. It's been called a military fantasy, and it is that to an extent, but it's also a very intense family drama. This is a 5-star book for me that's getting a lot of hype on BookTube right now. I read it because I wanted to be part of the conversation, and boy am I glad I did. We follow two principal characters in this book, Misaki and Mamoru, who are mother and son. They live in Takayubi, I think is what their town is called, which is on this island, which is called the Sword of Kaigen, because the people of this town, the men of this town, are supposed to be warriors who will protect the Kaigenese Empire because they are one of the first basically stops you would hit if you were trying to go into the Kaigenese Empire. And they're basically supposed to defend not only their own people, but the Kaigenese Empire in general from outside threats. And Misaki and Mamoru both belong to the Matsuda family, which is a very important high family in the town, which is basically the head of the warrior class. And because of that, they have very, very rigid expectations placed upon them. Their expectations are very different though, because Mamoru is the first son of Misaki and Takeru, I believe. And so Mamoru is gonna have the burden of being the first son of the family and being a warrior. And then Misaki has the job of basically not fighting, but basically producing sons to be warriors. And we follow Misaki as she's not very happy with the way her life is taken, and Mamoru as his life and his belief starts to change and be challenged for the first time in his life. He's a teenager and his very small world he's sort of grown up in is reframed, and then trouble comes to their land. And I don't want to say much more than that because I don't want to spoil anything, but that's basically what you need to know about this book when you go into it. I feel like other stuff is kind of extraneous or spoilery, so that's all I'm going to say about that. As I've said, I've heard people call this a military fantasy, and I do believe that as well. This is definitely at its I don't know about at its core, but this is definitely a story about a militaristic society being put to the test. However, it's also a very character-driven book, and I would say that the real conflict and climax of this book really doesn't revolve around the external conflicts, but about the internal character conflicts. Conflicts between different characters, their tensions with each other, and tensions within characters, within their own selves. That's really, in my opinion, part of the stakes and part of the resolution and everything. And to me, if you think about it this way, then the odd structure that a lot of people talk about when they talk about this book makes more sense. People talk about this book having kind of a climax in the middle and then sort of seeing falling action for a long time. I didn't really see it that way. I saw it as the central conflict is a relationship-driven and internal conflict. It's not all these external threats. If you look at it like that, then you can then see that the true climax of the story is not really when the external conflicts come to a head, but when the internal ones do. And if you've read this book, you sort of know what I'm talking about a little bit more, but I hope I explained it well enough for those of you who have not. The first part of this book is a lot of ground laying. You get to know the society, you get to know your characters, you get to know about their daily routines, their expectations that are placed upon them, and things like that. I would say that the things that tripped me up in the beginning were there's two scenes that I remember where there's a pretty extensive couple page long sort of info dump in the form of a conversation between characters and a history class lecture. And that is supposed to sort of give you a perspective of kind of the outside world, but it also has ramifications for the plot. So it's not entirely an info dump for the sake of info dumping, but I found it a little hard to keep up, and yeah, it just took me out of the story a little bit. But what I will say is it really wasn't an info dump where you have to absorb everything and you have to understand everything with that info dump. The things that are important about this world and the outside world outside of the Sword of Kaigen come up again and again and again. And so you don't need to know everything just from those conversations. It's more of just an intro to those conflicts that will come up again and again and again, as I said. And like I said, the info dumps were only like 2 scenes out of the first like couple hundred pages of this book. And really the majority of that book is really about like ground laying for characters and their lives. And you really just feel like you're experiencing their life more than it's being told to you. The atmosphere and world building is excellent. I feel like it was really just history and outside world, like the outside world outside of the Sword of Kaigen that is info dumped in that moment there, because everything you find out about the Sword of Kaigen happens through experiences with the characters and experiencing their life along with them. I loved this. I thought it was so immersive, and it really just gave me a good look at their society, which is very traditional and like value based, and they can be called quite old fashioned by the rest of like the Kaigen Empire or the rest of the world, but you really just understood why their values were so important to them, and you just know them better because of that and because you understand their world, and you kind of fall in love with it a little bit yourself, or at least I did, and I just really, really enjoyed being there. And so I wasn't like itching for the plot to start or whatever, especially because it's a character-driven book. That's kind of where you want to be. I can't promise it'll be like that for everybody, but I'm a very plot-driven reader, and I thought the beginning of this book was great. I was not bothered by not starting with like plot right away. During this time, we also get to know about the magic system, or like, I guess magic systems. The magic system that is used on this particular corner of the world, on this particular island, is very unique water and ice magic, and I loved seeing that. I loved how it was used in like fighting and training, and how it tied with their lore. I just thought it was done so well and so uniquely in a way I haven't seen elemental magic done before, but also just like magic in general. And I loved learning about this magic and what it could do, all the capabilities of various people, how it was tied to their ancestry, and the sort of the beliefs they held about themselves and their powers. And I loved what it meant to them. It really felt like it meant something to them. And that to me was very unique for a fantasy book. It wasn't just, oh, I have these powers now. Like, it was very much a part of their identity and something they were very proud to practice, and something that was very sacred almost to them. Well, exactly. It was very sacred. There's also a couple scenes or a couple chapters where we get some like a flashback into Misaki's past. I don't want to say too much about this, but I know that a lot of people find those scenes jarring, and at first I did too, because it's just such a different vibe than the Sword of Kaigen, like the rest of the Sword of Kaigen. And that particular area is very like traditional and kind of behind the rest of the world in terms of like technologies, and they just aren't like, I guess, as open-minded or whatever. They kind of are more traditional, and they know what they know, and they know different things, but they aren't as involved in the rest of the world. And Misaki was. I don't want to say anything else, but seeing that it was a little bit jarring, but I really did get used to it, and it really just became part of Misaki's character and a part of this book. I appreciated how unique the way that these flashbacks were done was, and by the end I thought things tied together really well. So this didn't impact the book on a negative level for me. Like, after reading Sword of Kaigen, I'm like, oh yeah, that's just Sword of Kaigen. Like, it has those sort of flashbacks, and it seems a little weird at first, but then you sort of get used to it and it works. But some people didn't get used to it, so I will just put that out there, that it can be a little jarring for a lot of people. Then we have a narrative switch where more action starts happening, and that is just written so beautifully and intensely. The way Wong writes battle scenes, I'm not someone who loves action scenes, but I loved hers. They were so emotional, so character driven, but yet so like action-packed, I guess. I mean, they were just so beautifully written, where like the magic was pushed to its limits and the characters were pushed to their limits. One criticism I could see people having is I could see people saying like some things maybe came too easily or shouldn't be possible or whatever, but I was so caught up in these people and their powers and how sacred they were to them that that didn't bother me. But if it weren't done with such a great execution, I could see people being like, these people are too overpowered here. We see a lot of the aftermath of battle and cost of war as well, and it's very heartbreaking, it's very intense, and I was shocked at how detailed it was at times. I will leave trigger warnings down in the pinned comment. I will go into a little bit more detail. I'll also be non-specific about them, so both will be available for you. I do recommend you checking those out if like cost of war things could be triggering for you. I can't really say much more about this, but I thought that everything was very sensitively handled and in a very human way, and just it was so good. The stakes of these books were so high and so good, emotionally and physically. I feel like we had different sorts of stakes, and I was invested in all of them. It made every moment of this book feel like put to use, and it made me invested long after, you know, there was an immediate physical danger to our characters. It made me so invested in my characters, and the emotional journeys these characters go on were so beautifully drawn. The family drama, the emotional journey between characters, the tensions, it was so, so good. The ending, a lot of people have issues with because they, again, have similar criticisms with Misaki's backstory, saying it sort of felt jarring and like it wasn't necessary and like it was, it didn't fit, but I thought it fit. And the reason I thought it would fit is because if you see this book as a character-driven, character-focused arc, I think it makes sense for the ending to be the way it was because of what it did for our characters, but I could see how people may have thought like plot wise it didn't fit, but I really don't think I think this book has a great plot. I loved the plot, but I really think that the focus of this book is what the plot can do for the characters, not what the characters do in the plot. Does that make sense? I don't know. But yeah, I loved the ending. I loved this book so much. I love these characters. Misaki is one of my favorite characters of all time. I love Mamoru. I love so many characters I wasn't expecting to love. Somehow ML Wong did that to me. It was so unique and so moving and so profound. It is one of my favorite, like all-time favorite fantasy books, all-time favorite books now. I just posted a video about fantasy standalones. I'll link that video. This book should be on that video, but I hadn't finished that by the time I filmed it. It's like my favorite fantasy standalone. I love this book so intensely, but in like a different way than I love something like the Stormlight Archive because they're very different. I described it basically to my friend as, okay, minor spoilers for a certain magical like move they can do. It's not really like a plot or character spoiler. It's just like something they can do in the world. If you don't want to know anything about the magic, skip ahead to whatever timestamp I'm putting on the screen. Basically, there's this thing they can do called the Blood Needle, which is a very precise and deadly move that some people can do. And to me, this book felt like a blood needle. It felt like a very contained, precise, every word counts, heartbreaking, painstaking, excruciatingly good and unique book that was just so emotional, and it felt like a blood needle to me. Sword of Kaigen was so different and refreshing and brutal and so freaking good. It affected me so much. I loved it. I've talked about this book enough, but I can't recommend it enough. Please check it out if you have not already. I am quickly losing more light, so I'm gonna try and finish this next book up very quickly. The next book that I am reviewing right now is The Rise of Kyoshi by F.C. Yee. Warning for this one, this is a book in the Avatar world, and I'm gonna be assuming you have some sort of knowledge about Avatar, and who Kyoshi is, because if you watch the show, you should know. But I'm not gonna spoil anything from the original series, so you can still watch this without spoiling the series for you. However, I wouldn't recommend it because I feel like I'm not gonna explain like what Avatar's world or characters are or anything like that. So yeah, this is young adult high fantasy technically because the Avatar world is like a world sort of different from our own. And we are following Avatar Kyoshi's rise, as you can tell from the title, Rise of Kyoshi. The biggest challenge of a book like this is not only to like capture the magic that Avatar: The Last Airbender has and like live up to something that is so beloved to so many people, but also to tell a story that we kind of already know a bit about and where you can't quite capture the same stakes as if you know nothing about the story. And I think this book did both of those things pretty well. In this book, we follow the companions of the previous Avatar, Avatar Kuruk, as they are searching the Earth Kingdom for the next Avatar. and they come across Kyoshi, and then in the next chapter, we follow Kyoshi as she is working as a servant girl for Avatar Yoon. Yeah, I was surprised too. I really can't say much about that, but I really was not expecting the book to start out like that, and I thought it was brilliant because I do think that it really does put a fresh spin on the sort of Avatar story, and it does something different than we've seen in like Aang's story or Korra's story, and I really liked that. Especially in the beginning of this book, I felt like this book had the same sort of vibe and humor as Avatar: The Last Airbender, and I think that it does for a little bit, but then it goes quite a bit darker, because it is YA, and Kyoshi is sort of a more morally gray Avatar than Aang was, I guess you could say. I do think that the explorations of Kyoshi's morality were not as complex as they could have been, and I didn't exactly love how they were done. They seemed a little bit simplistic to me, whereas like I know Kyoshi's morality is more complex than that. And so I was hoping for a little bit more in that regard, but I still think that it managed to pull off mostly what it was trying to do. I also wasn't as into the direction of the plot after the first a third of the book. It just kind of went on what I felt were sort of like side quests, or it got sort of sidetracked. It was a little bit meandering, and I wasn't as interested in the paths we took. I wanted something a little bit different. It was sort of a travel narrative, and I don't love those sort of narratives. And I know the reason why it was this way, because this is a YA book, and so it's trying to appeal to its audience, and so we're seeing Kyoshi when she's 16, when she is at the beginning of her career, and a lot of the stuff we know about Kyoshi's career, I think, happens later in her life, and to have this sort of novel about her very beginnings, like, it's not going to be as dramatic or as, high stakes as those times that we know about. It did manage to have stakes and be a good introduction into Kyoshi, I think, but it wasn't what I wanted from it. I was hoping to see more of the Kyoshi that we would see later, but of course no one is who they are at 16 as who they are at whatever age Kyoshi was when she was doing all that awesome stuff. And I'm not trying to drag YA when I say this, but it did feel like a YA version of Kyoshi's story because it was very much about her finding her place as an avatar and kind of coming of age, and smaller scale conflicts rather than a adult Kyoshi dealing with really complex morality and world conflicts, basically. And I wanted the latter, and I got the former, and it was a little disappointing to me, but it was still good. I really enjoyed Kyoshi as a character, though. I thought she was going to be my favorite avatar because of what I knew about Kyoshi, but seeing her, I do still think I prefer both Aang and Korra. I just have more attachment to them than I had to Kyoshi, but I still loved Kyoshi. I loved following her. I thought she was a great main character. I was really rooting for her and her endeavors. Yeah, it was good. The romance was cute and fun, and it was really great representation of a sapphic relationship, but it also wasn't as well developed as I would have liked. I thought they had really cute scenes together, but the build-up, I would have liked a little bit more of that. And it felt like a little bit early. I have a feeling things will be a little different for them in the next book, but I liked what they were to each other, but I just wanted to see a little bit more build-up or to get to know their relationship a little bit more before it changed. I don't know. But I still really like them, and the 4.5, the 0.5 and the 4 stars, is probably just because of that horse stance scene, because that was really funny. If you read the book, you know what I'm talking about. Otherwise, this is a pretty solid 4-star book for me. It is 4.5 because of, I found certain things really great about it, and Kyoshi's character at times was one of them. The dynamic she had with different people was one of them. But yeah, it wasn't as good as Avatar: The Last Airbender in my opinion. I don't know that anything will be that is in this universe in my opinion, but I always hope, and I do think it was a worthy successor, but it wasn't as good. And then I wasn't as attached to Kyoshi and her cast as I was to Aang's group or even Korra's cast. I love Avatar Korra and I love her cast, and I just didn't have the same attachment to Kyoshi and her cast as I did with theirs, but I do still really enjoy them and really like them, and I am looking forward to the next book. Yeah, I'm excited to keep going with the series, and I do think it was a good entry into the Avatar world. I don't fully know how to recommend it. If you want more Korra, if you want more content in the world and Kyoshi interests you, I would recommend you give this a go. Maybe even things will become more what I wanted them to be in the book too. There was room for that to happen and room for there to be sort of a time skip, I guess. But I'm not sure yet. I'll let you know when I read it. And I do think it's a good book, but I do think you have to know that you are getting a YA story that is the very beginning of Kyoshi's journey. You're not seeing her at her prime and at her height. But she's still a fun character to follow as a teenager, and Sue's just sort of figuring things out, and her cast is fun, and it was nice. One thing I really specifically loved was seeing how Kyoshi's like persona got to be formed with like the fans and her makeup, and there were things about it that felt like nods to the original series because the avatars are like reincarnated. If you are watching this, you probably know that, but in case you don't, the avatars reincarnate. It seemed a little bit at times like there was things that was popping up in Kyoshi's book that maybe Aang remembered and put into his life, in effect into his life, basically. And I thought that was so cute and such a smart and interesting thing to do. It's everything I wanted in that particular area. And yeah, that's why I gave it like 4.5 stars rather than 4 stars, which it overall probably is closer to. Thank you for watching this weekly review video. I will see you next week for, I think, more reviews. Let me know your thoughts on these books if you have read them. We can talk in the comments. Just make sure to keep it spoiler-free or space it out so people can't be accidentally spoiled. Anyways, thanks for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye.